I'm just going. That's it. Okay. Okay, give me 1 second. That was less time than I thought that I had.
Sorry.
No worries. Sorry about all the tricks we've had to do today. It's been a complete, not normal, training type with having to switch trainers last second, and I just got to pull up the right presentation, so we're actually looking at the right thing. It took me about 3 minutes, so
Okay.
Is this on the test?
it could be.
Okay, well,
No, this is not on the test.
Oh.
He's skipping to
skipping.
New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather, it was the group.
He'd rather go with me somewhere. No. And our spouses.
You're right. The other one's Sonoma, so it's end of the PBA.
And when is
That's
in May.
in May, yeah,
May.
kind of late May, actually.
We're almost there.
this
That's
year?
budget.
Yeah, I know, I'm in the middle of budgets. That's the thing, it has to be kind of like after the first part of June.
But it seemed like when I was watching the meeting that you guys weren't going to be involved in the budget until almost the end.
Sure.
John, don't stir my pot.
It just, that's the way it came across when I was watching it on Zoom.
Okay. Should be good. I should be ready to go. And actually what I'm gonna do is real quick. Part of what we're expecting from OGEC, I guess we call ourselves OGEC. It's way shorter than Oregon Government Ethics Commission, is that we are capturing data from our trainings.
Okay.
And so we've got some poll questions we're gonna have you all take part in. So if you want to take one of these and pass it down, these are little clippy guys that you can put in answers to the polls. If you get the wrong answer, it only gives you a light shock, so you should be okay.
Didn't we get more than one? Yes, twice.
Yeah, no, just one is fine. Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Almost the same time. Do this whole thing.
Is there, you need any more?
Maybe one.
Yeah, I've got.
He's more up there.
So again, my name is Chris. I'm a trainer with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. Just a little bit about us. We are a 9-member commission, and we have 15 staff members now. We in 2023 received all of the public meetings law, which caused us to need to double in size because public meetings law added a lot of work. And so that's what we're going to be going over today. And I just need to do one more thing and then I am good to go. And I apologize for all of this.
It's okay.
This hopefully will work when I push it. Hey, there we go. All right, we're good to go. So yeah, we are a 9-member commission. We have jurisdiction over the ethics law, which is chapter 244 in the Oregon Revised Statutes. We have the lobby law, which is 171, and then today we'll be going over public meetings law, which is chapter 192. Public meetings law was actually created in 1973. So all this stuff, although it feels really new for a lot of people, it's 52 years old. It's something that has actually been in place, and there's just no one's been over top of it. No one's had jurisdiction of it for those 50 years. So what you're gonna find as we go through it, some of these laws were definitely written 50 years ago and maybe could use an update. As we're gonna see, but that's, for the legislature to do. We're gonna go through what the expectation is and everything like that. So one thing I do have to start with, since we are part of a regular, part of a public meeting that you're having, we can have the public meeting recorded, that's fine. But anyone who's watching the stream or watches a recording of this public meeting needs to know that you cannot get credit by watching the recording or by watching the stream during this particular session. The only people who will be receiving credit for this training are people who are in the room with us right now. And so I do have to mention that part up front. So let's go ahead and jump in. We got some goals today. Our goals are, this is going to be an overview of the training. And so we're not going to get super deep into all of the exact statutes. This is more of, the goal is that you have the overview so that if something comes up, you recognize it and you know where your resources are at, which is our second goal, that you know what resources you have available to you to try and navigate any of these issues that do come up. And then our last goal is that anyone who that has that training requirement that was added in 2023, that you're gonna meet that training requirement today and get credit for it. So, but we do always encourage, even if you don't have the training requirement, if you are a part of a public meeting and you're an elected official, you still have to follow the law. So we encourage that you still have the training because it's still good knowledge to know. And we also encourage staff who take part in parts of the public meeting, because as you'll see, you have an effect on people who are responsible. And so it's really important that kind of everyone who has something to do with a public meeting kind of gets this training. So we definitely encourage that. All right. So this training does bring up a lot of questions. At the end of each section, and the first section is by far the longest, but at the end of each section, I will pause and take questions. I'm really bad at doing that, so try to wait, otherwise you'll trick me. But we have a lot of information to get through, but it's just more of a time thing. There also are going to be times where you're going to have questions about things that are super specific to your situation. And there might be a time where I tell you, you should call in and get some advice on that from us. And that's not because I'm trying to avoid giving you an answer, but with advice comes certain perks, like safe harbor protection around things. You're also going to get someone who's super focused on just your problem and not also trying to give a training and make it as short as possible because there's a lot of information. And so that's, you may hear me do that. And of course, if you do have any questions, you can always send them to our email at mail@ogec.org.gov. We've got a bunch of these little weird email things. So at the end, I'll make sure that you do have some contact information to be able to get a hold of us. And so that's what we have to do about questions. We like to start out by just throwing a question out there for all of you to answer out loud. And that is, why do you think your governing body holds their meetings in public? So what was the purpose behind that? You can just call it out.
Transparency.
Transparency is always the first one, every time. Any other thoughts around that?
We serve the public.
Serve the public, absolutely.
And that it gives us a chance to have input from the public if they know what we're doing.
Yeah,
Which
absolutely.
can be helpful.
Yeah, input for sure. Yeah, those are all great answers. And they're important things to remember as we go through the training, because those exact answers are why these laws were put in place the way they were. And so that's awesome. We're going to start with what us trainers call the hardest part of the training, and that is the pre-test. So you're going to get to use those clicker guys right off the bat. We've got 9 questions that are going to all be about what we're talking about today. We're not going to look at the answers afterwards. We're going to have you answer them, and then as we go through the training, we'll come back to those questions and we'll re-answer them and talk about the answers together. So this is just kind of, again, helps us with legislature wanting us to collect data and things like that. So the first question is, who is responsible for making sure that meetings follow public meetings law? A, staff, B, governing body members, or C, staff and governing body members? What do all of you think? I know there's 13 in here, so, okay. Someone's holding out.
That's true.
All right, what determines if a subcommittee is an advisory body subject to public meetings law? Members are appointed by a public/governing body, and the purpose is that the individuals make their own recommendations. The purpose is that they make recommendations as a group or by vote. The purpose is they don't make any recommendations, they just gather facts, or all of the above. All right, this next question. Governing body uses a Google document to do collaborative work outside of meetings. Members can edit this at any time. Is this a violation of public meetings law? Yes. This is an example of serial communication, and a quorum has access to contributing, edit, review what has been shared. No, because the members can edit the document, but the content will be discussed at future public meetings. Or C, no, because in addition to the governing body members, the public also has access to this document. Next, what accommodations are you required to give under public meetings law? A, meet an accessible location. B, meet an accessible location and provide an interpreter if requested no matter what. C, meet an accessible location and to make a good faith effort to provide an interpreter if requested at least 48 hours before the meeting. D, nothing is required. When do meeting notices need to be posted? A, within a reasonable amount of time for all meetings. B, within a reasonable amount of time for regular meetings, 24 hours before special meetings, and as soon as possible before emergency meetings. Or C, at least 48 hours before regular meetings, 24 before special meetings, and as much time as possible before emergency meetings.
Bam, you need to get 100%.
There we go.
Also, I know some knows where to find it in the book.
There you go.
What are the written notice prerequisites for entering the executive session to evaluate performance, discipline, or dismiss, or to hear complaints or charges? So this would be this is kind of a weird question to have in a pretest, but this is a notice that you're giving to a person who is going to be going through one of those things. You need to send the notice to them at least 24 hours in advance, identify the public body, give them the option of having an attorney present, tell them the reason for convening an executive session, provide how to request an open session, identify the date, time, location of the meeting, and send it by official mail. Pick all of them.
If all would apply,
Yeah,
not just.
It's not just one.
Ah,
Yeah. Had no surgery 3 weeks ago. And
Oh.
Moses,
runs all the
it's
time.
just doing whatever it wants. All right. Your public body has received a public meetings law grievance. What is the public body required to do? Okay, good. A, the public body is not required to do anything. It's the governing body's responsibility. B, the public body needs to respond to the grievance within 21 days. C, they need to respond within 21 days and send a copy to OGEC. Forgot to turn off my Teams, and now everyone is trying to message
Is that a violation?
me. No. I didn't know you were working right now. Well, yeah, I'm not. Don't do a train. Okay. All right, what resources are available to analyze if a governing body follows the provisions of public meetings law? Choose all of apply. A, OGEC, that's us. B, the AG's, the Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual. C, the governing body's council. D, your association, or E, none, you are on your own. All right, and the last one is gonna be, how confident do you feel in your knowledge of following public meetings law? A, very confident, B, confident, C, somewhat confident, D, not confident, but I know where to go when I have questions, or E, not confident. All right, thank you for doing that. We're gonna jump in now, and we always start with this piece of accountability. The first question that you answered was about who's responsible for public meetings law, right? And this is what we're finding is this can come to somewhat of a surprise. But again, it's about that transparency piece, building the rapport with the community that you're serving. And so we jump into who ultimately is responsible for a governing body to be following all public meetings law. And the answer to that is the governing body members individually. And so it is up to the governing body members to know that their governing body is following the public meetings law, and that includes even for the tasks that staff are doing. If something were to happen, staff would not be being looked at by the Ethics Commission, it would just be the governing body members. And not only are they responsible for it, they're responsible for their actions and their non-actions as well. Near the end, we'll talk about a few scenarios where we look at actions and non-actions and what that actually means. But it's important to know that you are responsible for yours. It's kind of nice to know that you're just responsible for yours and not somebody else's. But that piece is definitely there. And then also any fines that come out of any kind of sanctions would be issued to individuals, not to the governing body itself. And so that's also important to keep in mind because fines that come from the Ethics Commission cannot be paid by public monies. So it's important to keep that to know that as we go through this process. Our agenda looks like this today. There's a lot of information we're going to go through. First, we're going to talk about resources. We start with resources because we don't want anyone to feel like they're on their own. We want you to know that as we go through this, you already know, hey, there are places I can go to get help with solving some of these problems, right? Then we're going to talk about some key definitions that you need to know in order to really understand what the public meeting is supposed to look like based on how the law actually defines certain words that they use. And then we're going to talk about public attendance and location requirements, accommodation and accessibility requirements, then how to notice your meeting, then how to also record and take minutes of your meetings and what's expected there. At that point, we will take a break because again, there's a lot of information. And then we will talk about the executive session portion of meetings, the grievance process, the enforcement of public meetings law, and lastly, we'll go over the requirements that some of you have that you have to take this, and we will close out with that. So it's a lot of information, and so we're going to jump right into resources. So the first resource that we have is actually our website. It's a great resource. It's got a whole section that's just for public meetings law, and so you can go there to find anything we talk about today. You're going to be able to find either in that spot or another spot on our website, which I'll show you. We've got the training tab, and so right now we're doing for the foreseeable future. Once a week, we have this exact training happening in a webinar. So if you get to a spot where you just can't remember, you have amnesia, I don't know, whatever it is, you can always jump back in and take this really awesome, fun, long training again if you'd like. But we do have trainings on other things as well. At the bottom of this section, there is actually a section for training resources. At the end of today, we're going to be sending you an email with all the resources that we show in our training. But if you lose that email, forget where it's at, you can pull up all those resources from that tab as well. So you definitely will always have access to everything that we show you. And then we also have an advice tab. If you're ever in a space where you're in a situation, you're not sure what to do, we highly encourage that you reach out to us for advice. We're talking about resources right now. And what we want you to know is we want to be a resource for all of you. When it comes to advice, you can call us. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can come in person, which to my knowledge, that doesn't happen very often, but you can. You can write us through the website, you can email us. But when it comes to advice, we have 3 different levels of advice. Now, we can only give advice on things that haven't happened yet or hypotheticals. So we can't give advice on things that have already happened. One, because if a complaints come in about it, we can't give advice on things that are already before our commission. And 2, we can't tell you to do something different because what's done has already been done in those situations. So call us if you know a situation's coming up, or maybe you had a meeting and something didn't go great and you know that we got this topic 3 more times. Call and get that advice. Some of the advice can take a while to get. The commission advisory opinion can take up to 60 days to get, but that's an actual written advice from our commission on what to do. All of this stuff comes with what's called safe harbor protection. What that means is if a complaint comes in and you are found to be have violated the public meetings law, but you followed the advice that we gave you, the most you could be sanctioned is a letter of education, because you were doing what we told you to do anyway. So we kind of gave you bad advice. That's on us. And so that's why we definitely always recommend contact us and get advice. It gives you that little bit of protection. It makes that situation a little bit easier to navigate, knowing you have that in your back pocket. So please utilize us for advice. Order administrative rules. So in OAR 199, there's actually 2 different divisions. There is 50 and 40. 40 is executive session, 50 is public meetings law. This is a place where if you are in a situation and you need direct information from the statute, you might read the statute and be like, what the heck does that mean? Because the statutes are a dry read. And so you can come here and get a little bit more information on each of these topics as well. It's a little bit more narrowed down, a little more defined. That can be a good help. And then a really important resource is the Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual. This was updated on December 28th of last year. So it's super up to date. It's very relevant. In fact, there's a lot of stuff in our trainings today that we're going to look at. We pulled directly from this manual. It is an awesome resource. So we definitely recommend that you utilize this. There will be times where this actually will give you more information. One of the reasons why public meetings law is confusing is because public meetings law is only one part of the law that dictates what you do in your public meetings. There are a lot of things that can overlap and have a say in how you have your public meetings. And so the Attorney General's manual actually does a really good job of talking about intent and what you should be looking for with your own bylaws and how that fits in with the law. So it's a really good resource to use. All right, so now we're going to jump into some important definitions, but what we need, all the definitions kind of fit around this question. When do we need to hold a public meeting? The reason why they fit around this is because the big definition we've got to know is what a meeting is as defined by public meetings law. And so the public meetings law defines a meeting as the convening of a governing body of a public body in which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or to deliberate towards any final action that they can take. Now that is a lot, right? But you'll notice there are numbers next to each of those words. And that's because the public meetings law has also defined each of those words. And so the definition for a meeting is very, very heavy, with a lot in it. And so we're going to go through what each of these mean per the law. And that kind of helps us kind of get the groundwork for what a public meeting is supposed to look like. So we're actually going to start not at one, but we're going to start with a public body. So what is a public body? Well, a public body is the state, the city, the county, any kind of regional council or special division or special corporation that is a special district, excuse me, that serves the government. And so like you guys are probably with the water district, well, you're water and light, so you'd be a special district. You should be a special district, right?
No, we're actually paid by the city.
Oh, you're part of the city. That's great.
Through the charter.
Through the charter. So that's awesome. So that is a public body, but the public body also is going to be any of the agencies that are included in those. So your commissions, your committees, if you got bureaus or councils, any of those things, they're also considered public bodies. per the public meetings law. In order to gauge whether or not your body is a public body, it's all about whether or not your group was created in order to meet or in pursuit of a law that was put in place, whether that be some governmental agreement, whether it be some kind of bylaw or anything like that. That's kind of how you tell what if a body is a public body.
So what if it's created through your city charter? That would be the same thing. Right?
Yeah, it's in pursuant of meeting a law that was put in place. Yep, exactly. So that's a public body. Next is governing body. So a governing body is going to be two or more members of that public body who have the authority to make decisions or recommendations on administration or policy for that public body, right? And so that is that seems like a simple answer, but there's really two kinds of governing bodies, and those are decision-making bodies and advisory bodies. Again, it's all about that policy and administration piece. That's what we're looking for as far as what they can affect. But a decision-making body is a body that is put in place by the public body, and they have the actual government authority of the public body to make decisions. They get to make decisions that affect the public body and everyone who's a part of it. The advisory body is similar, but it's like what it says, they're not making decisions on things. They are making recommendations to that governing body or to the public body on various things. So this would be like your budget committees, things of that nature.
So we would be a decision-making body. And if we had a subcommittee,
yeah,
that would be an advisory.
They'd be an advisory body, absolutely. And advisory bodies, they are generally created by a governing body or a public body. The reason why that's important to know is, as a governing body, you need to know that if you make a subcommittee who's going to advise you on things, you're creating another governing body that has to follow public meetings law. So they're still under the same rules for their meetings that you follow with yours. And so that's important to keep in mind. And those advisory bodies are generally, they're making those recommendations by group or by vote together. It would be chaos if the budget committee, you had 10 people and they all gave you their own opinions. Right. That would not be super helpful. So they're making one recommendation as a group to that governing body.
And if they don't, if they make it individually, then they're not an advisory body?
If they're allowed to make it separately, they all give their own opinion. What we would recommend is you contact us and let us help you figure out what their status is.
Okay.
The reason for that is my next slide. That was actually a good segue to the next slide. There are a couple kinds of bodies that are not considered governing bodies. The first one is going to be a fact gathering body. And so this one's kind of tricky. A fact gathering body is a subcommittee or a body whose only authority is to provide purely factual information. They don't get to make any recommendations. It's just providing the facts. The reason why this is tricky is how they give you those facts can make or break them as a fact gathering body. If they come before you and they say, hey, these 3 sites are good, but this site over here doesn't fit the need for the project, they now are making a recommendation and they're no longer a fact gathering body. Same as if they omit data to you because they feel like it doesn't fit what you're looking for. It's the same thing. And so we have been saying across the board, if you believe you have a fact gathering body, or if you have a body that has a unique rule, like everyone gets to give their opinions, contact us and let us just go through a few questions with you to make sure we can confirm what their status is. Because a fact gathering body doesn't have to uphold public meetings law, but an advisory body does. And so we want to make sure that no one's getting in trouble by doing something wrong. The other kind of body that is not a governing body would be a committee that is advising an individual public official. So if you've got the mayor or the governor or a chief executive officer who has the power to make a committee, and that committee gets to advise them on specific issues where they have the power to take that advice and do what they want with it, then that committee is not a governing body. They're not subject to public meetings law. Now, if they have to take that advice and give it word for word to a governing body, that's not the same thing. That individual public official has to have the power to act on their own. That's all a governing body is, right?
That's all.
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of stuff that comes with this. The next thing we're gonna look at is quorum. Kind of get a reprieve, one of the easier definitions, right? So quorum is the minimum number of members that a governing body can have that in order to conduct business. So, for OGEC, we have a 9-member commission. Our quorum, and usually quorums are decided in your bylaws or in your charter, things like that. Our quorum is 5 people, and so, or 5 members. And so that doesn't matter if we have how many seats are full, how many show up to the meeting, it's always 5. So if we have 9 members and two of them, their terms end and they don't renew, and now we're trying to fill those seats, we're down to 7, quorum is still 5. So now we have less people to get 5 out of, right? And so that's important to keep in mind. If you don't have a policy already that dictates what quorum is for you, it's just going to be the simple majority. So if you have a 5-member board, that'd be 3 for quorum. If you have a 10-member board, that'd be 6. And so that's what quorum looks like. Convening. Now, convening is a new definition that came with Senate Bill, or not Senate Bill, House Bill 2805 in 2023. And we actually start with communication because this is kind of one of the key parts of the definition of convening. So communication is defined as the expression or transmission of information from one person to another, and it can be either through verbal means, nonverbal means, written means, and electronic means. Now, nonverbal means can be thumbs up, can be, I don't know if anyone winks anymore, it can be a wink, right? Can be a head nod, like those are all considered nonverbal. Even sign language is now considered nonverbal. And then electronic can be social media posts, email, could be through Zoom, things like that. And so it's important that any kind of this communication it's all considered communication as the public meetings law defines it. And the reason why it's important is because when we talk about convening, convening is members of the governing body communicating with each other. And that could be gathering in a physical location and communicating. That could be using real-time technology, so Zoom or any kind of streaming service that's used. That could also be using serial electronic written communication. So that could be sending out an email from one person to another, chaining emails together. That could be using an intermediary to talk through things. And so we're actually going to talk about these last 2 in more detail because they are further defined and they're important to look at. So serial communication. Serial communication is anytime one governing body member is speaking to another governing body member about a topic that is before the governing body or likely to come before the governing body outside of a properly held public meeting. So that is what a serial communication, how it's defined. And that communication can be through in-person means, over the telephone, video conferencing, in written form, so letters, emails, texts, social media, through an intermediary, which we'll talk about more in a minute, or any way that you could convey information. The reason why that's important to know is that a quorum of governing body members are not allowed to use serial communication to deliberate or make any decisions on topics that could come before the governing body or are before your governing body. And so it's really important as we go forward, we're going to talk about other forms of communication and what's allowed, but it's really important that governing body members are being careful who they're saying and what they're saying and who they're talking to about that stuff. But it is a violation once a quorum becomes involved. Intermediary is a person who relays communication between 2 people. So if you've got governing body member, member A is talking to member B at the grocery store, and tomorrow's the big meeting, and there's an agenda item on there, and they're like, not really sure how to feel about this agenda item, they're talking about it, and they leave, and maybe member B goes to a restaurant, runs across member C, and they start talking about it, right? Now you've got 3 people involved in a serial communication. And once that hits a quorum, you now have a violation of public meetings law because those deliberations are supposed to happen in the public meeting itself. And so that's why intermediary is so important. But it doesn't have to be a governing body member. That can be a staff member. That can be really anybody who is taking that around to different people trying to have those conversations. And it would be when you are, deliberation is when two people are talking about information, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we hit some different kinds of communication as well.
Excuse me, just a second.
Yeah.
If, I understand that if I have a meeting, I talk to somebody and then I talk to somebody else and say, this is what that person wants to do. But I think that slide said I had to relay the information. So if I just tell two different people at different times what I think, is that a serial communication?
So that leads into what I was gonna talk about in a little bit.
Okay, that's
But
fine.
no,
No, that's,
no, it's okay. It's a good question, and I'll touch on it now. So deliberation is when you have two people who are transmitting that information back and forth. So one of the questions we get asked all the time is, well, if I'm a board member and I see the agenda and I'm confused about something, or I have a question, or I need to talk to somebody about this. How do I do that in a way that I don't get other people in trouble? So for example, our board, if one of our commission, if one of our commissioners has a problem with something, they go to our executive director, who knows that I'm not going to take what they tell me and go tell anybody else, because now I'm creating serial communication, right? But what I can do is that our executive director, she can talk to our other commissioners, and that as long as she's not distributing what everyone else feels, it's not serial communication. So that is how it is defined. The reason why serial communication is a really slippery slope. Because the hardest part of it is, once I talk to somebody, I'm now not in control of what they do with that information, right? They can go wherever they want with that. And so we really try and recommend people to stay away from it as much as possible. But you are right, it is when those ideas are going back and forth and you're having that deliberation piece. That's really what it is about.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. So now we got decision. Now, decision is one of my favorite things in this training, because for some reason it's really well defined. The rest of them feel kind of vague sometimes. They really got decision nailed down. So decision is anytime a quorum is taking a final action, determination, vote, or final disposition on a matter that is a motion, order, proposal, measure, ordinance, or resolution. That is a decision. It's very clearly defined. Now, they do talk about the decision-making process, and this is important when we talk about different types of communication. So the decision-making process includes just even identifying the type of decision needs to be made. You could be gathering information in order to be able to make a decision. You could be identifying or assessing different types of information that you need to gather, or alternative ways to handle things. You could be considering the information, or you could actually be making a decision. All of these parts are what makes up the decision-making process. And that's really important, because when we talk about the next definition, which is deliberation, deliberation is any kind of communication between two governing body members that takes part at any point in the decision-making process. So it doesn't matter if you're even talking to another governing body member about, man, what kind of decision do we even need to make here? Like, that's like before you're even close to making a decision, right? It doesn't matter where you're at. If you are deliberating towards eventually making a decision on a topic, it is considered deliberation. And so that's really important to keep in mind. Now, we are going to touch, like I said, on communication types, but first we're actually going to talk about the different types of meetings. So the types of public meetings are going to be regular meetings. Those are generally what is decided in your charter or your policies. For our commission, they meet every 6 weeks. And they're scheduled all the way out through the whole year. You can see on our calendar when they are. Those are our regular meetings, right? Some groups meet once a month, some once a quarter. It's usually decided for you. A special meeting is going to be any meeting that is not one of those meetings or not an emergency meeting. So our commission, we recently, a couple of years ago, we got a new executive director, and so to have the official hiring and bringing that person into position, they have a special meeting for that, which is not a part of the regular meetings that we have, right? Emergency meetings is going to be any time there's an actual emergency that dictates that your group needs to make a decision immediately. And so there has to be an actual emergency attached to that. We'll talk more about emergency meetings later. Executive session is going to be either a part of one of these three meetings, or they can actually happen on their own as well. You can have a standalone executive session, but it's going to be a public meeting that is closed off to specific people for specific reasons. We got a whole section that we'll talk about on that. And then we also have work sessions, and work sessions are generally meetings where you're maybe even just being given information, initial information for something that you're going to be working on together. Those are still considered public meetings, and they still need to follow the public meetings law. And often there's a lot of different names for those: work sessions, work group meetings. They can be called a lot of different things.
That's what this is.
This is actually, well, yeah, I guess for you guys, this would probably could be called that. There's training as a part of it for sure. But usually in a work session, you're going to be just deliberating towards decisions that you're making. But yeah. Okay, so these are communications types that public meetings law does not apply to. The first is going to be informational. So whether you're at a training, this is purely educational information. So you're in this training with us, with OGEC, and we're providing you information that is educational. We're not going to be discussing, at least during the training portion of this meeting, we're not going to be discussing things that could become before your group or before your group. It's just educational. That type of communication does not require to follow public meetings law.
And why are we following it for this thing today?
That is a good question.
Because your attorney is very careful.
I knew that part.
We do have, this training, it can happen outside of a meeting, but I was just in a city meeting last night. Just a lot of groups do make it a part of their regular public meeting. One, to be careful, sometimes that's the easiest way to get everyone there, is they already got to be there for the public meeting. So there's lots of reasons why they might make that decision. Also, I was invited here like earlier today, so I don't know why that. Okay, the next is the any kind of communication that is unrelated to governing bodies, deliberations, or decisions. I call this the go to dinner with your friends part of the law. So a lot of times when we talk about serial communication, what happens is people hear all the rules around it and they're like, I serve on this board or this commission with a friend of mine. Are you saying I can't talk to them anymore about anything? And that's not what we're saying. We want you to still have relationships with these people. You just got to be careful about what you talk about. If you want to go to dinner and talk about the NFL draft, or you want to talk about your favorite show, or whatever it is, things that aren't going to be coming before your governing body for decisions or deliberation, you can talk about any of it, and it doesn't have to follow public meetings law. So you're good to go on that stuff. It's just specifically items that come before your group for deliberation or decision. And then the last piece is going to be non-substantive information. And so that would be like if one of your members, last minute, hey, I got a family emergency, text everybody, not gonna be able to make it to the meeting because family emergency happened. Maybe it's gonna be a long meeting and you're trying to decide what everyone wants in their pizza for lunch, right? I mean, it has to do with the public meeting, but it's not the point of why the public needs to be there. That non-substantive information is also not going to be included in public meetings law as far as being required. So that stuff can happen. All right, and then these types of gatherings are also not considered meetings. There's two types, and that is on-site inspections and association gatherings.
Just answer my question.
Oh, there we go. So if you are going to have an on-site inspection somewhere maybe you're going to go somewhere and look at how they run their program because you're interested, you want to bring that back to maybe apply to what you're doing, right? And you've got enough people, maybe a quorum of members are going, maybe not. Even if a quorum of members are going, you're allowed to meet and go through that on-site inspection, and that's totally fine. Association gathering, let's say you're going to be going to a League of Oregon Cities conference, or some kind of conference where you've got a quorum of your people going, but they're there to learn, to bring information back. That's totally fine. You're allowed to do that. In both cases, You're allowed to do that as long as your group doesn't get together at those places and start deliberating or discussing matters that are before your group. And so that really is the key when it comes to communication through all of this. Now you might be wondering, well, if we go to a conference, we're at the conference to learn things that we want to bring back and apply here, or even with the on-site inspection. So how do we do that? What we recommend, because the law is written the way that it is, what we recommend is that at your next meeting, have an agenda item that is debriefing the on-site inspection or debriefing the conference that you were at. Give your members the opportunity and the place to have those conversations in a public meeting, so they can say whatever they want and they don't have to worry about any kind of violation. Maybe your meeting is 6 weeks out. That's too long. We don't want to wait that long. People will forget. You can have a special meeting. Special meetings are, you only have to have, look, we'll see it, but you only have to have 24 hours notice before a special meeting. Have a special meeting and create an opportunity again for your people to come together and have those conversations. You know, that just, it's not the most, maybe the easiest way off the bat, but it is a way for your group to have those discussions in a way that keeps anyone from having to worry about any kind of violation. Excuse me for a second. Yes, go ahead.
So on the on-site inspections,
Yes.
is that defined in any way? So example would be, we do an annual watershed tour.
Yeah.
Commission goes, it's essentially an on-site inspection.
It is shocking how many things are not defined.
Okay.
And they're gonna want you as a governing body to define it for yourself. And that would be, I mean, an on-site inspection, it doesn't define it outside of. It doesn't define it. It would be something that you would want to do. Just hearing what you said, that would be something I would think would be an on-site inspection. If you are concerned about it, you can always contact us and get some advice around it. That way your group's protected when you go.
Or we can just, at our next regular meeting, we can just have a line, agenda item. Anybody has any issues or concerns?
Yeah.
When they want to, or what they-
Absolutely, and we do know too that there have been times where we've seen, again, out of just a case of being careful, where the on-site inspection, because it was within their jurisdiction, they actually made a public meeting out of the on-site inspection.
That's what we've done in the past.
Yeah, and so, and that's something you can do too. You know, that's, I don't want to say you can't do that, or you know, the law doesn't necessarily require it, but that is a way of, now we're in a public meeting and we can communicate. So that is another way of doing it.
So in the association gathering, our quorum is 3.
Okay.
If hypothetically, if two of us were, if maybe all of us went to the association meeting, but 2 of us went to a particular series of classes.
Yeah.
On an issue or something that could come up with us, would it be okay for those 2 to discuss that, as long as they were careful not to discuss it with the other 3 until the public meeting happened?
Sure. So here's what I'm allowed to say from my boss. We recommend you don't have serial communication. If you can help
Sure.
it. That being said, what the law says is that when you're at the association gathering, you can talk about if you're in a class with somebody, you're allowed to talk about what was discussed in that class. But once the conversation comes to something that you can deliberate on or decide upon that goes before your group, that's when the serial communication piece comes into play. It's a violation when it's a forum involved. And as far as giving out advice of whether or not you can, if it's okay to have serial communication, as long as you're not in a quorum, I am not allowed to give out advice like that.
Okay. But I just want to make sure I understood what the
Points of
slide said.
violation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Because that hypothetically could be very valuable if you have 2 people going to a conference,
Sure.
taking a series of classes, and then you talk about stuff that can become policy.
Absolutely. And I think too, you know, like, you know, I've been a part of other businesses that weren't government. And when you go to a conference, what do you do when you're there? That's all you talk about is the stuff you're working on. So we realize, like, this is not the most
Okay.
you know, freedom allowing rule, law that is in place, but it is it is very clear on what it expects is around what kind of conversation you're having.
It's clear to me that a quorum should not be talking about this.
Correct.
At the meeting, but.
That is, yes, when
if
a
you-
quorum happens, it becomes a violation.
Okay, thank you.
So going back to the on-site inspection, I want to follow up on that. So, if we make it a public meeting, that means that we have to give the public the right to come with, right? Which means we have to try and accommodate that, but we don't know.
Yes,
So that's a problem.
yeah.
Okay, good.
And that might be too, but I have, I've got cards at the end. That might be a good conversation to have with our director, actually. Her brain is crazy when it comes to this stuff. She's very good at helping people figure out what the best plan of attack on some of this stuff is. She might be a good person to pick her mind about that too. Okay, so back to the original question, when do we need to hold a public meeting? That's whenever a quorum of a governing body, of a public body, needs to convene in order to make a decision or to deliberate towards a decision on anything. That's how the law defines a meeting, and it defines that because the Oregon form of government requires an informed public. It requires that the public understand what the government is doing on its behalf, and that it gets to be a part of those decisions and deliberations that are happening. And so that is why the law is written this way. And that leads us to our first section of, does anyone have any questions?
We cheated.
That's okay. So I told you I wasn't gonna let you do it, and then I didn't even think about it. I forgot about it. I said that until this exact moment. So I am the worst when it comes to that. But that's okay. We're moving good. We got time to get through everything. I'm not worried about it. But does anyone else have any other questions?
Is noticing a quorum a thing? So like we're talking about these watershed tours and stuff, one way that I've handled that in the past is not to necessarily notice a special meeting, but to just notice that a quorum of the commission may be present, but in this event, there will be no deliberation or discussion towards a decision.
Sure.
So that's the way I've done it before, but I don't know if that actually meets the letter of law.
Well, what I can tell you is that the public meetings law doesn't have anything to say about that.
Okay.
It just says, for on-site inspections, you can have them as long as you don't deliberate towards any decision. It doesn't require you to announce anything. Now, does that benefit your community knowing that you're being transparent and telling them? Sure, maybe, sure. Like that's something that you get to decide for yourself. It's just not something that the law necessarily has in its place. And there's going to be times too where you may have other things that your other laws or your charter or other bylaws dictate that you do in some of those moments that the public meetings law doesn't say anything about either. So there could be other things in place for you there as well. So. All right, well, let's go ahead and get out our clicky guys. We're going to tackle the first three questions that we looked at earlier, and we'll see if we get a different answer, and we'll talk about the answers. So the first question, who is responsible for making sure that meetings follow public meetings law? A, staff, B, governing body members, C, staff and governing body members. What do you all think? All right, yep, the correct answer is the governing body members. Remember that staff are not going to be held responsible, even if they are the only ones who touched the item that is in question. It's just the governing body members individually. What determines if a subcommittee is an advisory body subject to public meetings law? Members are appointed by the public / governing body, and they make recommendations as individuals. They make recommendations by group or by vote. The purpose is purely to gather facts and make no recommendations or all of the above. What do you think? I know there's two more people. At least one. There we go. All right, yep. So the majority of you got it. It is B. Remember, they're making the recommendations by group and by vote. So you're not getting a bunch of them, you're just getting one coming up. So great job. And then the last one, the governing body uses a Google document to do collaborative work outside of meetings. Members can edit this at any time. Is this a violation of public meetings law? A, yes, it's an example of serial communication. and a quorum has access to contribute, edit, and review what has been shared outside of a meeting. B, no, because while all members can edit the document, the content will be discussed at a future public meeting. Or C, no, because in addition to the governing body members, the public also has access to this document. What do you think? Yep, correct answer. Yeah, this is exactly serial written communication. Because they're having deliberation, which is communication on the written form, outside of a properly held public meetings law. Great job, mostly nailed all of it. All right, the next sections we're going to look at are going to be a lot of its administrative provisions. These are generally things that staff usually do, although there are definitely governing bodies where governing body members are responsible for some of these tasks. But we just like to point out that often staff are the ones who are actually handling some of these items. So we're looking at public attendance and locations requirements, accommodations and accessibility needs, noticing the meeting, recording the meetings in the minutes, and then we are going to talk about the grievance process, but that'll be at the end. And again, even if staff are doing it, it is the governing body's members' responsibility that these are happening correctly. So the first one is public attendance and meeting locations. So let's look at these requirements. The first thing you have to know is that all meetings that are held by a governing body, they need to be open to the public, and all persons must be permitted to attend. Now, the quorum of a governing body is not allowed to meet in private. A executive session meeting is not considered a private meeting. It's still considered a public meeting. It's just closed to specific people for specific reasons that are allowed in statutes. And so private meetings of a quorum are not allowed to happen. As far as public comment and disruptions go, the public meetings law only requires that you allow access to your meetings to the public. It doesn't require that they comment or have any say in anything per their laws. Now, you may have other laws that require you to do that, other reasons why you do it. You just do it because you want to, whatever that is, that's fine. But per the public meetings law, it's expected that the governing body and the presiding officer maintain decorum of the meeting. And so they are allowed to, per public meetings law, limit public participation or specific individual public participation if need be. Now, you may have, this is one of the cases for sure where you may have other laws or policies in place that dictate how you do these things, and that's fine. It's just that you're allowed to do this based on the public meetings law. Location requirements. So we're going to talk about where you can have a meeting at. So public meetings cannot be held at places that discriminate based on race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, age, or disability. We do not give examples of anything like this. But if the place you're looking at to hold a meeting does discriminate against one of these options, you cannot have the meeting there. It's also discrimination to hold a meeting in a place that is inaccessible to persons with disabilities. So if you need more information on this, you can look at the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, and you can go to ada.gov and get more information there. We will include that link in the resources email that we send you after the training. I got ahead of the clicker, I apologize. It's also considered discrimination to fail to make a good faith effort to have an interpreter available for persons who are deaf or hard of hearing if they requested a regularly scheduled, if they had requested it for a regularly scheduled meeting. And so now there are requirements around their request. They must request within at least 48 hours before the meeting. It needs to have their name and the language, the sign language preference that they have. And this does not apply to emergency meetings. In emergency meetings, there is still verbiage around making that good faith effort, but obviously in emergency situations, you're gonna have to meet quickly. So it's not a requirement of those meetings. I also will point out that this is specifically for deaf and hard of hearing, not for other languages. Believe the reason for that is that it's around disability instead of language that's being used, so. If you need any kind of help getting services for deaf and hard of hearing, you can actually use the ODHS website for it. Again, we'll send you this link as well. It's a great website for this. They are really easy to work with. They can get you an interpreter if you need it, usually. And now as far as, again, more on where you can hold your meetings, you need to hold your meetings within the geographical boundaries of your jurisdiction. So for a city, that's within the city. If you're with the state, it's real easy, you get the whole state to use. Or you can have it at your main headquarters. Or you can have the meeting at the nearest practical location. That is how the law is written. If your headquarters or your meeting location is going to be within federally recognized Oregon tribal land, as long as that's still within your geographical boundaries, you can have your meeting at that location. If you're going to have a meeting with another governing body, we just ask that you choose one of the jurisdictions to have the meeting at, or the nearest practical location. So if they're really far away and it just makes more sense to meet in the middle, that makes sense. Now, as far as emergencies, if there's an actual emergency that's making it necessary for you to meet immediately, you can have the meeting in a location that is not generally allowed by public meetings law. And that is because obviously, depending on what the emergency is, maybe your main office is now not available. So you are allowed to in emergencies. Now, we don't define emergencies, which is not surprising, but examples could be a flood or a fire. One of my coworkers likes to bring up catastrophic plumbing issues. Could be an emergency. So if it requires immediate action, you can meet where you need to have that meeting. Yes.
So what you're talking about physical location, what if could it be via Zoom if they're not all in the same location?
Could be. And we'll talk about Zoom meetings here in a bit. Yeah. Training sessions are allowed to be held outside of your jurisdiction. You can go to a training session anywhere. Again, as long as during the training session, you don't deliberate on items that could come before your group or are before your group. You can have a meeting that is purely electronic or over the phone, purely virtual. That's totally fine. What you need to remember is that public meetings law still applies to those meetings. And you need to provide the public a way for them to join in that meeting either in person or they need to have electronic access. So that could be a phone number, that could be a Zoom link. There are some cities that, because of the internet problems they have, they actually do set up a room in their city hall. People can go watch the live stream in that room. And that's because they can't provide just a Zoom link or whatever. And so if that's something that needs to happen, you can do it that way as well.
We have a watershed and a water treatment plant that's outside of our technical jurisdiction, the city of McMinnville. Could we have a meeting there?
That's our ownership.
We own it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I mean,
We should check. If we want
you
to.
should check. I want to just tell you what I feel, but I get in trouble whenever I do that. So the attorney knows how that goes. So we're not supposed to say what we feel. So I would call and ask
Okay,
about
great.
that.
Thank you.
That's a really good question.
So on the electronic and telephone meetings,
Yes.
how do you provide access for somebody that's hearing impaired or disabled?
Yeah.
'Cause, I mean, I don't know how you would do it.
Yeah, and we ask that question a lot. That's how the law is written around this is very tricky because the only thing that's required is that you have an interpreter available for them. So right now, what I can tell you is that using closed captions on your meetings, virtual meetings, does not count as using an interpreter. And again, this is where it seems like it's a 52-year-old rule before a virtual meeting even existed. You know what I mean? And so because the way the rule is written, it can be tricky. And so we are telling people, if that's your situation, call us and get advice about it. Because that's a really easy one for a complaint to come through and for you to not really have an answer of how to deal with it. You know what I mean? So that's a good one to get advice where you can have some of that protection with it. That's a good question. Okay, electronic access. So regardless of how the meeting is held, whether it's in person, all virtual, or a hybrid of that, to the extent possible, governing bodies must provide the public with electronic access to the meetings. And that can be, if again, a phone number to listen, call and listen, a link, video feed, whatever that looks like. Now, if you are a governing body that allows public testimony or comment, and you're going to have an all virtual meeting, the public still needs to be able to do those things. So whether that's unmuting and making their comment, or writing their comment in the chat and that gets read out, whatever that looks like, you still need to make that accessible to them if that's something that you allow in your meetings and you're having a virtual meeting. And then with media access, you must provide, because media gets access to your meetings, including executive session. You must provide media access to your executive sessions. However, you are providing access to your governing body members. So if all of your governing body members are in person, you can require that media is there in person. But if even one of those governing body members is there virtually, you must allow media to access it virtually.
That's come up.
And so that's how the law, talks about that specifically. And that kind of segues us into media. The first thing that you should know, OGEC cannot define media. It's the Attorney General actually doesn't allow us to. However, Attorney General Opinion 8291 does talk about the requirements for media and what a media member looks like. So for public meetings law, it is required that the governing body make those decisions based on that opinion for media, what they believe media is and how they're going to handle media based on that opinion. So if there were a complaint to come to the Ethics Commission about a media member not having access, what the commission is going to do is they're going to look at that opinion and look at what the governing body's actions were and determine if it was reasonable based on that opinion or not. But it is up to the governing body's responsibility to just determine what media is. Any questions about any of that? Awesome. We've got another poll. This is just a one question poll. So what accommodations are you required to give under public meetings law? A, meet an accessible location. B, meet an accessible location and provide an interpreter if requested no matter what. C, meet an accessible location and make a good faith effort to provide an interpreter if requested at least 48 hours before the meeting, or D, nothing is required. Yep, C is the correct answer. Right, I'm sure that B person, the buttons are small, you probably just bumped it, All right, let's talk about noticing. Now, the next two, we're going to talk about noticing and recording the minutes. Those are things that usually are done by staff. And so we still got to point out that even though it's done by staff, it's still the responsibility of the individual governing body members that they're done correctly. And so that's just important to keep in mind as we go through this. This is a good part for you to learn what is expected that your staff needs to be doing. So when it comes to noticing, the first thing that's important is that the notice goes to the public. That's the whole point of the public notice, is the public gets it so that they're aware of the public meeting. The other people who need to be notified also are interested persons and media. Now, both of these are, an interested person is just a regular part of your community, person in your community who has requested to be notified of your public meetings. And then for media, it's media members who have requested to be notified. You don't have to scour all the media in your area to let them all know. It's just whoever has requested to be a part of those meetings is who you have to let know. And this notice must go out 48 hours before your meeting. Now, you'll notice it's not a lot of time for the deaf and hard of hearing people to be able to request aid. And so we always tell you this is the minimum requirement. If you know about your meetings in farther in advance, it would be awesome for your community to let them know about it. And with more time to be able to request those things. But the law does say 48 hours is the minimum amount of time required. As far as where you post, you are required to post either on the public body or the governing body's website, or a third-party website that has a link in your public body's website or governing body's website, so that people can get to it and get the information that they need. As far as third-party websites, those need to be free to access by the public. And there are certain state agencies and educational districts that have to use the Oregon Transparency website. Everyone's free to use it though. You could use that as well. It's a giant calendar with like 1 million things on it. It's kind of cool to see. Kind of gives me a headache, but you could absolutely use that if you'd like. That's totally accessible to you. And as far as like where are other places that you could post notices to, that's newspaper, community bulletin boards, social media accounts, email, and mail. We always try to encourage everyone to use as many mediums as possible. That way you can reach as much of your community as possible with your notices. As far as what's in the notice, it needs to have the date and time and the location of the meeting. Wouldn't be a great notice if it didn't have those. It also needs to have the subject of discussion that's going to happen. Now, this can be just a list of items. It can be your actual agenda if you'd like. The only thing that's really kind of required around this is that it needs to be as accurate as possible at the time that you notice it. So what that means is once you've posted it, if you still need to amend your agenda, you can. If you're in the meeting, you can amend your agenda in the meeting. That's allowed to happen. But when you post the notice, just make sure that that list is as accurate in that moment as possible. And then you need to have in your notice the contact information for the person who can be contacted to request that hard of hearing or that deaf interpreter. And that needs to be a person's name, email, and phone number. So all that needs to be in the notice that you're posting. If you're going to have a meeting that's just an executive session, the noticing requirements are the same, except you also need to include the statutes and citations that allow you to have executive session. That needs to be in the notice. And then if anyone has a conflict of interest, those need to be publicly announced before the executive session starts. You can actually put those in the notice as well. And that does count as you publicly announcing them beforehand. And so a lot of times we get asked that question, how do we announce them? Some people have different avenues, different news outlets that they can use. But for governing body members, if they have one, you can put it in that notice and that will count. Again, I'm ahead of the clip.
But
Yeah.
it counts if you announce the conflict right before the executive session starts if you announce it in the meeting, right?
Yeah, so that's just for if you're gonna have a meeting that's a standalone executive session.
So
If it's a part of a regular public meeting, you announce it in the public part before you go in, totally fine.
But what we normally do is we have a meeting, the mayor calls the meeting to order, roll is taken, and then the executive session is announced. And so it's okay if we do that in between the roll call and the executive session being announced.
Yeah, before the doors are closed for that
Yes,
executive
right.
session,
Okay,
you make your announcement, that's totally fine.
good, thank you.
All right, this is what our agenda looks like. It has all the requirements. We actually attach our agenda to it. Our agenda is not that short. It'd be nice. We have very long meetings. But you can attach the agenda or it can just be a list. But you can see Becky Mason is our person to contact for any kind of accessibility needs or accommodations. And that needs to be in the notice. Special meetings. So again, these are meetings that are not your regularly held meetings. A special meeting needs to be noticed at least 24 hours before the meeting. And that needs to go to the governing body, members, the news media, interested persons, and the general public. But once you have done that, you can have your meeting 24 hours after noticing. Again, that's a minimum time. So if you would like to give more time, it's always something you're allowed to do to allow the public more time to be there. But you can have these at any time that you'd like. Emergency meetings. So here's what we're talking about emergency meetings. This is how they work. So you have an actual emergency happen, an event that is an actual emergency happens, and you realize we need to have a meeting right now to make a decision right now because of this emergency. So what you're going to do is you're going to notice that meeting as soon as possible. What that means is you're going to contact the media and interested persons that you have. You're going to post the notice as usual. And then you're going to have your meeting. So if we need to have it immediately, okay, we need to have it, we need to do these things, and then we can start the meeting. These things still need to happen first, but you can usually do these pretty quick. 20 minutes from now, we're in the meeting, right? So once those things happen, you're going to have your meeting, make your decisions, and then in the minutes or your official recording of the meeting, you are going to describe the emergency that justifies you having a meeting with less than 24 hours notice. What that does is a complaint still could come through about that meeting, but what's going to happen is we're going to look and see that you had an emergency meeting, see what that emergency is, and that's something that is allowed. And so that's how an emergency meeting is handled. The key thing though is you need to keep the meeting topic to be only on the item that is made necessary by the emergency. And that gets asked quite a few times. This isn't time to go through the budget again. Like focus on what that emergency is and then get through the meeting. Yes.
So if you have a complaint on that, and I think you mentioned earlier that you guys aren't deciding what an emergency is. So that's the governing body's responsibility.
Yes, that is our commission.
Okay, so if our board says we need an emergency meeting on a specific topic.
Yeah.
You get a complaint.
Yeah.
How do you deal with define emergency?
Basically so we'll talk about the complaint process at the end. But you would have the opportunity to come before our commission and they would obviously see the record as well. But you would be like, this is what happened. We had this emergency because of this. And our commission is going to take what you have to say. And they're ultimately the ones who are going to decide, yeah, that's reasonable, or yeah, that's not reasonable. The complaint process is with the grievance process that now is with public meetings law. It has changed a little bit of the complaint process as far as like, you're going to know what's coming down the pipe now before. You won't be surprised if we're contacting you about a public meetings law thing, because the grievance has to come to you first.
Right.
But there's nothing in the law that keeps the public from complaining.
Right.
If they go through the process. So it is kind of what it is as far as that it can just happen. But our commission is we get a lot of complaints. Like they've handled a lot of things. So they're very good at that stuff, but ultimately it's up to them to decide. Okay, any questions about noticing? All right, let's do another poll question. So when do meeting notices need to be posted? Within a reasonable amount of time for all meetings, within a reasonable amount of time for regular meetings, 24 before special, and as much time before emergency, or at least 48 hours before regular, 24 for special, and as much time before emergency. Right. Yep, the answer is C, 48 for regular, and these are all minimums. You can obviously give more time, probably not the emergency. If you give more than 24 hours on emergency, then it probably should have just been a special meeting. But yeah, that's great. Okay, recordings. Again, another item that is For us, it's 100% staff that's doing this, so. Let's jump in and look at what the rules are around recordings. So, the governing body is required to provide documentation of all of their meetings in one of the following ways. And that is an audio recording, a video recording, a digital recording on RAN. Or a written minutes. Now, if you're doing written minutes, you're not required to keep full transcripts. But you do need to have like the true reflection of the discussions that were occurring, as well as the positions each of the members were taking on different topics. And then all minutes or all official recordings of the meetings need to be made accessible to the public within a reasonable amount of time after the meeting. Now, minutes need to include the members who are present. It needs to include motions, proposals, resolutions, orders, ordinances, measures, and the results. All votes and all of the vote results. It needs to include the vote of each member by name. Unless your governing body has 26 or more people. And then it needs to have the subject of any discussion as well as reference to any documents discussed. Now, a lot of questions come up about voting. I've got a few more slides. Let's wait until those slides before you ask them. So when it comes to voting, all voting must be done in public. You cannot have any kind of secret ballot. The results of all votes need to be recorded in your official recording, and they need to be done. Each governing body member must have their vote recorded in that official recording. You can do written ballots. If you do written ballots, they need to include the name of the ballot needs to have the name of the member who's voting on it. And the results need to be announced in the meeting that you took the vote. Now, what we get asked all the time is, well, what if it's unanimous? Right?
Good question.
Yeah. Or, what does that look like? Well, it depends on your official record of your meeting. Because there's two ways to keep that, either through written minutes or an audio or video recording. If you take written minutes, in your written minutes, you must record the individual member's vote by their name. But when you announce it, you can announce unanimously passes. Passes 3-2. You can announce it however you normally would announce it, if you keep written minutes. If your official recording of your meeting is a video or audio recording, then you're going to need to announce each member's vote by their name. In that case, we always recommend roll call voting, because at that point, it's kind of just taking care of itself. And the reason that is because it requires that the vote name be in there in the official recording. A lot of people have gone away from written minutes and are just doing recordings, and so they need to do this. If you keep both, you keep written minutes and recordings, the written minutes just need to have by the written name as well as vote in the written minutes, and that's fine.
So why, if the written minutes say the vote was unanimous to pass this, and the minutes also reflect who was there, why doesn't it tell you how each member voted?
That's a good question. That's just how the law is written. I don't know why they decided to have it that way. But they did require in the official record of the meeting that the name be, that the minutes be recorded by individual vote's name.
Is that a new addition?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. But again, the hardest part of all this is, September 2023 was the first time anyone was over top of this thing. So it's been around for a long time, but no one's really been keeping track of what people have been doing with it. So to my knowledge, this isn't a new one. And full disclosure, when we first got it in 2023 and saw this, we're like, started out, how do we keep our, what are we doing? Because it kind of jumps out at you, you got to make sure you're doing it right, and are we doing it the right way? So, okay, as far as schools, I'll keep school districts. They have to, common or union high school districts education service districts, community college districts, and public universities. They have to actually have a video recording of all of their meetings. They must be posted to their social medias or their website within 7 days of their meetings happening. And if they lack broadband to do that, they can do just audio. It does not count as far as their the executive session portion of their meetings. They don't have to post, as well as if they're a school district that has less than 50 students, they don't have to follow this either. And then state agencies who are within the executive department, whose members are subject to Senate confirmation. If they're going to have an all virtual meeting, those need to be recorded, and they must be posted on a third-party website that's free to the public to view, and it has to be up for no fewer than 30 days. And again, that does not apply to the executive session portion of their meetings. The executive session portion, we're going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about whether or not it needs to be posted, because that's something that's generally decided by other things besides public meetings law. Like for our commission, one of my favorite things about us, which is hilarious to me, we like 95% of our meeting is an executive session of all of our meetings. And the moment that our meeting ends, it all becomes public record. So I don't know why we have to do it in public session just to become public record an hour later, but that's how it works, and that's what the law says, so we do it. But everyone has different rules around that, so you'll want to make sure you follow what your rules are when it comes to whether or not you have to post executive sessions or not.
That means your minutes of your executive sessions get posted?
Recordings of our, yeah, everything.
That's a great idea.
Ours is, I mean, our entity exists for a really specific reason though, so like, it makes sense like when they tell me about it, but it just makes me laugh. Cause I'm the one who has to make it public, and I'm like, all right, here we go. All right, so we talked about a lot of stuff. I know the goal is to be out of here by when? What time are we trying to be out of here?
3:30.
3:30. So we just take a 5-minute break, okay? Let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to talk about executive session, the grievance process, the enforcement of public meetings law, and we're going to talk about the requirements that some people have for this training, and then we'll close up. So let's jump to a break. Is there a restroom? Yeah.
They're in. Yeah.
But you're gonna stay there. There's no way. They had very short. That's always good. So they say that. Well, you're gonna say that. You came to do the special inspection.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're supposed to want to do other stuff. Yes.
Ken, why don't you want to just, when I asked you about this stuff, why don't you just want to give me a brief synopsis?
Yeah, it's not complicated. Jeez.
Well, nowadays, the last 3 hours or 3 days with the boys trying to keep up with them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I joke with, not joke, I tell Heath, but I keep wanting him to get in the excavator or any of the equipment. I'm like, whenever you have a chance, get in there and learn how to use it, because when you get on jobs, you want to be the guy that knows how to run the equipment.
Right.
Otherwise, you're on a shovel or a rake. And we got into a part where we didn't need the excavator, which is what I run usually. And Grayson's really good on the skid steer, which left Heath and I out there on shovels and rakes for about 8 hours, pushing gravel around and running a compactor. I'm like, I need to learn how to run run the skid steer.
Or have a signal to have,
Yeah,
instead of call you.
yes, emergency. Yeah, my body's sore and all kinds of stuff, like all these muscles,
Yeah,
breaking. Oh,
like we went to the gym.
So easy to shovel too.
yeah,
It's heavy.
it's heavy. Yeah, we had 4 truckloads of it, and it was a lot of work.
Godfrey,
What's that?
read Godfrey. I hope you got your day off for your birthday. And I'm like, no, I'm in ethics training. Way to go. Way to get a day off. Oh, thanks. Fellow Pisces. When's your birthday?
March 3rd.
Oh, okay. Well, happy birthday to you.
Mine's March 2nd.
Whoa.
There you go.
Happy-
Yeah.
That's actually interesting because I have a friend that used to live in Dundee that her birthday's today too.
Really?
And she spent most of her time in McMinnville when they lived in Dundee.
Oh, lots of Pisces around here.
Look out. Water dogs.
Seems fishy.
Funny, funny.
Kids have learned just to ignore that. They don't respond to it. I'm not
Okay.
sure how they pick that up. But how is that a strategy?
My children are starting to figure that out about my dad too. But there's a lot to ignore.
Aw,
Lots of tips.
your dad's awesome.
Lots of tips. He'll
That's
provide
how I tell my kids it's my favorite part.
Still gives them.
When you groan at my joke, that empowers me.
Yes, yeah.
That tells me you want to hear more.
So my granddaughter found and gave me a book about dad jokes, but they crossed the D out and put a B in.
Oh,
That's
okay.
cute.
There you go.
And one of the things the book said was, what happens to kids when they're 2 or 3 is if they kind of say things in a way that twists them and some meaning, people laugh and give them lots of attention. And dad jokes are just somebody who's never gone beyond that stage.
That's right. There you go. It's funny.
Remember the snack from the barbecue out there or something?
Snacks?
Actually, we have snacks. Didn't you only grab snacks? Good timing.
Can we stay on break?
I'll wait for the snacks to get back. That's important.
Yeah. We could have it.
Okay, thank you. I don't have that.
That was yesterday. No.
That's online, John. It has nothing to do with you. We gotta make a decision. You look nervous there.
Oh, no.
No, it has nothing to do with any meeting. Make a decision.
Let me tell you, when we get a lot of phone calls that are very hypothetical
Yeah.
situations, so.
We're so focused on the front.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
What's in here? Oh, it's first.
She had like a birthday cake or something.
We have barbecue. You can't have those. Those are gonna smell. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm actually gonna want to pass, if you guys can pass that around. All right, are we good to, am I good to start up, back up again?
Yes.
Awesome. That was been through a lot already. A lot of information and just me blabbing at you, so I apologize for that. I'm gonna do a little bit more. So yeah, now we're gonna talk about executive session. The grievance process, enforcement and training requirements. So executive session, what is an executive session? Well, it's a it's a public meeting that is closed to certain persons for deliberation for very specific reasons that are found in the statutes. And so as we go through these, actually first we'll jump into this and I'll get that caveat. So we need to know that in executive session, there is a final decision prohibition. So basically that means you cannot make any final action, decision or vote while you are in executive session. It must be done in open session. Now, when you're in executive session, you're working on stuff together, chances are you're gonna come to a consensus, and that's okay. I mean, that'd be really unrealistic for us to ask you to work together and not come to a consensus, but you still need to come out and take the vote in public, even if it's just confirming the consensus that was reached in the executive session. Now we have this checklist. This is just the order of operations if you're going to have an executive session as a part of a public meeting. Obviously, first it needs to be noticed correctly. Once you're in the meeting and it's time for the executive session, the presiding officer announces that they're going to go into executive session. At that point, that's when conflicts of interest are announced. And then the presiding officer needs to list and cite the actual statutes and reasons you're going to have the executive session. They need to talk about whether or not they're going to come back into open session or not, and what that part looks like. They need to talk about who's allowed to be in the executive session, and then who needs to leave the room or needs to leave virtually. And then they need to make sure they give the disclosure on what media is allowed and not allowed to disclose from executive session. If they don't give that media part, they don't say you cannot talk about X, Y, and Z. Media is allowed to talk about whatever they want. If you get off topic in executive session, which is a problem for other reasons, but if you do, media is also allowed to write and disclose that as well. So it's really important that you stay on topic. So now you've made all those announcements, you go into executive session. Then again, it's really important that you only discuss the provision that you're cited. What this means is, let's say you cited 2 reasons why you're going into executive session, and someone asks a question, and all of a sudden you realize, oh man, there's a third thing we could talk about. Even if that third thing is a reason you can have an executive session for, if you didn't cite it, you can't talk about it in that executive session. So it both needs to be allowed by a statute, and it needs to be cited. It has to have both those in place. And so that's really important to keep in mind. And again, no final decisions can happen while in executive session. As far as coming back from executive session, what you said going into executive session kind of determines that. So for us at OGEC, we announced we're going to an executive session, and then at the ending of the executive session, we will immediately reconvene in open session. We don't give any times because we don't know how long our session is going to take. So when we're done, we can open the door, let everyone in virtually, and we immediately can convene in open session. If you do give a time, if you say at 1:30, we're going to go reconvene in open session, and you end executive session at 1, you need to wait till 1:30 before you start, because you need to allow the public to be there, and that's when you told the public that would be happening. So that's what that needs to look like as far as coming back into open session. Let me say this last part, and then I'll get to your question. You need to make sure too that you keep a recording of your executive session, a record of your executive session. And again, whether or not you make that public or not is up to your bylaws and your policies and things like that. But there still does need to be a record because executive sessions are still considered public meetings. You had a question?
I did. In regards to the notice for executive session.
Sure.
You put down whatever the ORS or that it states. If it's a litigation or something, you don't necessarily have to put who it's with.
Correct.
So once you get into an executive session and someone has a conflict, because they may not know who we're having the discussion about.
So so especially for us, this is a super important one because most of our meetings are in executive session. We have a executive session agenda that goes to our commission, so they know names and who's coming up. Because they're gonna be in the executive session or part of it anyway. That would be something that if you'd like to talk, maybe with our director or one of our people about the best way to handle that, you could call us and get some advice about that. I don't know what is expected, but I do know that, for us, our people know who, the public doesn't know it until after because we have to post everything.
Right.
But beforehand, it's all confidential, but our commissioners get to know because they are the commission who will be presiding over those issues.
Okay, yeah, I talked to OGEC about not having to put the name, if that was the legal way to do it, and they said, yeah.
Yeah.
But still curious about once they get in the room, do they just leave or what? So.
Yeah, because obviously they need to be able to announce their, and so when we have when we have a conflict of interest, our commissioners will announce if they have a conflict of interest on agenda item 42.
Mhm.
Then they're not saying names either during that because of the confidentiality piece.
Mhm.
But there still needs to be the announcement of the confident of the conflict of interest.
Maybe they just announce it when the topic is
Well,
announced.
that's what I was wondering. So you said something that caught my attention is the agenda is not, the commissioners may have a different agenda than the public agenda. Is that what I heard?
Well, you don't have to. Again, this is where we get into other rules besides public meetings law. For us, we don't have to provide the public our executive session agenda before.
Citation, just a citation.
But the citations. So we have, for us, we actually, we start in open session. So that we only hand out the open session part of our agenda and make our citation announcements in the open session before we go for that exact reason. And it gives our people an opportunity to make their conflicts of interest, but they don't have to say names. They're just saying agenda items. And they're saying, they might say the nature of their conflict, that individual, I have this type of relationship with them or whatever, but they don't have to give specifics. For us, again, it's different because at the end of us, it all becomes public, but that's where you would want to speak with your legal counsel about what the expectation is for what you are required to do.
If something comes up that isn't expected in the executive session and somebody has a conflict, can you adjourn the executive session, come into open session, disclose the conflict, then go back into executive session?
I want you to remember that question
Okay,
for a few slides from now.
okay, great.
Because we're going to talk about that exact thing.
Okay.
But we do have what is expected, but that gets asked often. I do want to address it.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Okay, does that kind of help a little bit? I mean,
I still have once we get into session.
I would
that's a
reach out
conflict.
to us and get an opinion on that. Because even that might be one where we're gonna tell you over the phone and then just send you an email confirming what we talked about, and that would be enough for you to be able to follow with. So, because that's not a huge one, but it is important.
Sure.
So,
Okay,
yeah, I would call us and get an opinion on that. Okay. We also have a sample script that we pulled from the AG manual. These are just ways that the presiding officer can say the things they need to say in order to go into executive session. And you can actually pull these directly from the AG manual and use them if you'd like. And so the first one is just about citing the reasons that you're going to be in executive session. You only need to cite the reasons. You can have more than one reason and talk about more than one thing in executive session. You need to cite all of it, but you only need to cite the reasons you're doing. You don't need to cite all of the reasons. That'd be a ton. This next one is just letting everyone know who's allowed to be at the meeting and who needs to leave. The third one is just specifically talking to the media and what they're allowed to talk about. The fourth one is acknowledging that there will be no final decisions in executive session. And then the last one talks about coming back into open session. So all this stuff can be found on the AG manual. Absolutely, if you see something there you want to use it. It's totally good to use. So are there any questions about executive session so far? Now, there's not a poll after this one. I know I've been setting y'all up for that. We're actually gonna jump into the permissible reasons you can have an executive session. Now, what's important to know about this is most of these are going to be found in ORS chapter 192.660 sub 2. And you'll see actually in the bottom right, we have the number. You're going to see all the sub numbers that are going to have the actual citation that you would use for that particular item to go into executive session. And so I just want to point that out to you. I also want to point out to you that a majority of the reasons you go into executive session are actually optional. You don't have to talk about them in executive session. You can, it's allowed, but you can talk about them in open session as well. The only times that's not true is when you have another law that is dictating something different. If you've got a FERPA or HIPAA regulations that are deciding you need to be in executive session for it, or state or federal confidentiality laws, they may say you have to. But unless those are saying you have to, you don't have to do all of these in executive session if you don't want to. And then there's a bunch of these that have prerequisites. And so those are things that must be done before you can have the executive session. At the end of this training, when we send you the email, we actually have a really awesome handout that actually lists all of the provisions of executive session, as well as all the prerequisites and everything that is culminated into one thing. And so if you want to use that, you can. But again, it's an awesome resource to use, but we're going to jump in and we're going to look at them all together. That in that handout, we have them broken down this way. So there's confidential records and litigation permissions, there's hiring and employment permissions, negotiation permissions, security and safety. And then we have the one that I like to tease our director about that really should be called miscellaneous, but she hates that word, so we call it less frequent. And those are things that are like around like liquidating assets and things that are across the board less used. There's still obviously reasons you can do it, but we're not going to go into any of those today. So confidential records. So your governing body can have an executive session to review information or records that are exempt from public inspection by law. It needs to be directly exempt by law, but you can find a list of those in the public records law. We don't have jurisdiction over that, but the ORSs are there. So that's 192.345 and 355. That has a massive list of what records are exempt from public inspection. And so you can look to see if what you need to talk about is on there. You can also use this permission to go over attorney-client privilege documents with your legal counsel. Now, if you're going to do that, though, you do need to have like a written record, like a legal memorandum in order to do that. But you can use this for that purpose. Other examples are going to be confidential student records, bids. Maybe you have a workers' comp case that's in there. There are other things that obviously fit in this that you can use this for. You also can meet with your legal counsel, meet with your attorney in executive session to go over current or litigation that is likely to be filed. Now, what's important with this one is your attorney needs to actually be there. You can't just talk about it amongst the group. Attorney has to be there for it. And the AG manual does recommend that you only use this at the advice of your legal counsel. But if they advise it, you can meet with your legal counsel on litigation. It does not cover litigation that's already passed. The purpose behind this is just to give that equal footing with private parties. They have way more accessibility to their legal counsel. And so you need to be able to have candid conversations about legal ramifications and all that stuff. This allows you the option and the ability to do that. We're gonna look at some hiring and employment related provisions. There's usually a lot of prerequisites that come with these. So you can meet in executive session to talk about hiring a chief executive officer, a public officer, a staff, an employee, any of those. But you do have to have the vacancy advertised first, and you need to have your hiring practice or your procedures already adopted. Those need to be in place before you go into executive session. Now, if you're going to be hiring a public officer, you need to allow the public the opportunity to comment on the filling of the position. This isn't the chance to comment on named candidates. That doesn't get to happen. But the actual filling of the position, they need to have the chance to talk about that if they'd like. And then if you're going to hire a chief executive officer, you need to have a public meeting where you are adopting hiring standards, criteria, and the directives of the position at that time where the public has the opportunity to comment on all of those things being put in place. Again, not named candidates, but specifically those items as a part of the job.
What's a public officer?
It's a great question. A public officer is, actually, I think I have the actual definition here. Yeah. So the public officer is usually it's an elected official. How does this work? I was just told this yesterday, so I shouldn't remember it. But the public officer is the chief executive officer would be over the agency.
Right.
And then the public officer is usually man, now I'm gonna have to find, I'm gonna find that out.
We're not gonna.
I'm gonna come back to you and answer that afterwards, because now I'm mad at myself.
I don't think it would be, I don't think it would be elected though.
Right.
It's not
They
elected,
don't
it's
have
not
to.
elected, it's appointed, it's an appointed official.
It could be
Uh,
though, like when the county commissioners fills a vacancy on the commission, or when they select candidates to fill a legislative vacancy, maybe that's what it is.
I will tell you before I leave here.
Okay,
I'll tell all of you, I'll shout it from the mountaintop.
but if you can't, don't worry about it, because we would never do.
Okay,
We're not gonna be doing it. Unless you change a very strange stuff.
that's right, I'll think of a strange one and we'll go from there. You cannot use this provision to talk about the filling of an elected position that is now vacant. Or the filling of a public committee, advisory commission, or another commission, any of those positions. You also can't use this provision to talk about just general employment policies. That needs to happen in public. And then also any kind of salary or benefits, whether those are monetary or non-monetary. And so those also need to happen in public. And then remember, you can't make any final decisions. So you can talk about the candidates and things like that, but you can't ultimately you can come to a consensus, but you can't make the decision to hire someone. You need to come back to open session for that.
So we can't talk about the general manager's salary and benefits in executive session. But that when we do his review.
When you are hiring a position, you can't talk about the salary and benefits of the hired position in executive session.
To hire.
When you're hiring a position,
Okay, gotcha.
there are other rules around when you're doing reviews of executive officers and things like that. Now, this is a handout we just made, and it's pretty cool. It kind of helps you know which prerequisites you need to put in first, depending on the position that you're hiring. And so,
Okay.
yeah, and so you can see like, depending on what position, you need to do 1, 2, or 1, 2, and 3, or all of them. So, that's going to be included in the resources that we send you as well. You can have public, or you can have executive session in order to go over discipline or dismissal or complaints or charges of an officer or an employee or a staff. However, you do need to give them the affected person, a written notice of this meeting. And there's a few things about that written notice that you need to do. We're gonna go over those in a second, but the reason for it is they need to have the ability to request it be done in an open hearing. And when we say open hearing, really what we mean is just an open session, not an executive session. And so one question that we get all the time is, can this provision be used for complaints against fellow board members? And that just depends on your charter, what your charter allows. If it allows it for your board to actually discipline or dismiss other board members, then you could use this for that, but it's not up to the public meetings law for that piece. Now, the other one that requires a notice to the affected individual is performance evaluations. So you can go into executive session to do a performance evaluation on a chief executive officer, public officer, or an employee. But again, you need to give them that written notice so that they can request it be done in an open session. And that written notice needs to go to them 24 hours or 1 business day before the executive session, whichever one's longer. It needs to identify the governing body that will be meeting. It needs to identify the time, date, and location of the meeting and the purpose of convening in executive session. It also needs to have the reason or the way that they can request it to be in open session. Now, when we talk about open session, we're not talking about a formal hearing here. We're not talking, this isn't a chance for them to delay things so their attorney can be present per public meetings law. If there are other if there's a collective bargaining agreement or a contract or other laws that are in place around the employee and staff that is being affected, you may have to follow those if they get rights from those places. But per public meetings law, it's not the opportunity to do that for those purposes.
If you're having a meeting about somebody about job performance, are they in that meeting? I mean, is it like a prior discussion by the people above them? And
So if you're
then
going
they
to be
bring
doing a performance evaluation, yeah, they need to be made aware of the performance evaluation. And they can request it be done in public, or they don't have to request that and let you do it in the executive session. Whether or not you allow them to be a part of it is something that your governing body needs to decide. You cannot use any of these provisions to talk about agency goals or even staff goals. So when you're talking about hiring someone, that's not the opportunity to say, do we want to change the purpose of this position and what they're working towards? That stuff needs to happen in public. And then again, you can't talk about salary or benefits, including non-monetary benefits, while you are in executive session for the hiring process. All right, there are 4 different provisions around negotiations. And so we're going to look at these. The first one is labor negotiations. You are allowed to meet in executive session to meet with your labor negotiator. Now you need to specifically be meeting with the person you have identified as the person who does these things for you. They have to be there. But this is one of the opportunities and one of the times where you can exclude media from your executive session. So when you're meeting with your labor negotiator, you could have media leave for that. If there's labor consultations that are happening, these generally happen in a public session. This is where your negotiator is meeting with the staff or the employee negotiator. If both parties decide they would like to meet in executive session, they can then meet in executive session. And what's unique about this is they are not subject to the noticing requirements of public meetings law. And that is to allow them in the moment to be able to go in and out of executive session, whether or not they need to privately discuss something that's a part of the negotiation.
But that only applies if the public body is doing the negotiating, right? I mean, or a forum of the public body, because if John's negotiating with the union.
It's specifically your labor negotiator meeting in a labor consultation. And so it's when the 2 sides negotiators, whoever's been identified, are you been identified as the negotiator?
So they could be sitting in another room while we're negotiating.
No, but if we're not here. And it doesn't involve us until he reaches a tentative decision with them. That's not a meeting, is it? I mean, this doesn't,
I guess I'm a little bit lost in the question.
okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, no,
asking a question.
I don't, it's some
So,
of the
so
details I
my
don't know.
question is, the rules you've talked about here, where
Yeah.
it has to be an open meeting or executive session. If none of the commission members are involved at the point of the labor consultation,
Okay,
then these open meeting rules don't apply, right? We're not in, we're,
so you're not a part of the labor consultations that are that happen?
no,
Okay, but that would probably be something that's in your charter and your bylaws.
I think it'd be our policies. We
Yeah,
would just,
yeah,
we
that-
would just delegate that negotiation to
Yeah,
John.
the main piece, what this is saying is that if you have negotiators from both sides meeting,
Right.
if they need to, they can go into that executive session in and out during the negotiation because they need to be able to make certain things private because they could be confidential.
Right.
But as far as like how you handle your consultations, public meetings law isn't gonna decide that. That's gonna be up to your policies that have been put in place.
Yeah, because that would be,
Yep.
yeah, you wouldn't want that out in the open as you're going back and forth.
Yeah.
That's
So-
But we don't have to worry about public meetings law during the part of this when John is doing the negotiation with the union.
I can't say either way, that's up to your guys' policies and rules, so.
It's not the commission negotiating at
We're not
that.
the
No,
We're not the covered.
You're negotiating on behalf of us, but we're not doing it.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good. It just
Yes, no, I
concerned me here.
feel like he knows what you're saying, and I think he's got it. I'm trying to understand. This is not, I'm doing my best, I apologize.
It's my fault.
No, it's all me, definitely me. Okay, real property transactions, you can convene in executive session. In order to meet with the individual you have designated as the person who can conduct your real property transactions. Now, when we talk about property transactions, we're not just talking about purchase and selling, could be long-term leases or rentals, things like that. But it needs to be specifically the transaction of property. It's not a time to talk about long-term space needs. You can't talk about your policies around the buildings you own in that time. You're just meeting with that individual to talk about potential transactions of property. And you can't accept any offer while you're in there. That you can come to a consensus that you want to, but you need to come out into open session to actually make that decision.
So would that include easements as well?
Is that the accrual of property?
Well,
Yeah.
the property
Yeah.
right, so I would think so. That's why I was asking.
Yes, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
I will now have to learn that word easement. There we go.
Letting someone use your property.
All right, and then the last one is kind of around matters of trade and commerce. If you know that you're in competition or feel you're gonna be in competition around trade and commerce with another governing body from another state or nation, you can meet in executive session to talk about those things. If your competition is with another governing body in the state of Oregon, you cannot. It has to be another state or another nation.
So how would we know that? We may not know that though. Because I'll give the example would be, let's say we want to negotiate a power sales agreement. Or purchase agreement for power sales. It may be another BPA customer, but they could be in Oregon, they could be in Washington. We may not know that
Yeah,
because we wouldn't know who that other party's negotiating with.
sure. That's a real good question. You should, I'm gonna definitely give you my card if you want.
And
That's a Sam question.
if we're negotiating with Bonneville Power Administration, which is part of the United States government, that's really not another state or nation. So can we talk in executive session about negotiating with BPA?
Federal
He's-
agency.
He's gonna call and he's gonna ask.
Sam's probably gonna be the one calling.
Yeah,
in.
Sam's gonna find out about that one.
Great.
Some of the stuff, and this is the hardest part of a trainer is, I mean, you guys know your business so well.
Right.
And I'm meeting with all sorts of different entities, and so there are specifics that I don't always know when it comes to that stuff, so.
Yeah.
That would be one that Sam could probably figure out pretty easily, and if he has questions, he can always contact us and we're more than happy to help, so. Okay, so that's negotiations. Now we're gonna talk about security and safety. There's a few new statutes that came in with this. The first one is that you can meet in executive session to talk about school safety or plans around threats towards a school. You can meet about an executive session for those. And that includes, they just threw a slide on me yesterday and they didn't even tell me it was in here. So now I apologize for reading a little bit here, but that includes nuclear power, thermal plants, radioactive material, transportation, the generation and storage of electricity, hazardous substances, gas, liquefied gaseous form, petroleum, sewage, water. It also includes telecommunication systems, wireless radio systems, and data transmissions by whatever means. There's a lot of stuff in there. I've not memorized this list yet, so I apologize. This is definitely a new one that wasn't created in 1973, and that is cybersecurity. You can meet an executive session to talk about cybersecurity infrastructure and responses to cybersecurity threats. So that is a new one in 2023.
And do we have to allow the media in that one?
Yes. Yeah, that one is the media is allowed in that one. Now,
So we couldn't do that before 2023?
Yeah, I'm just thinking we've been doing it for quite a while.
no, well, I mean,
It was,
I didn't hear
it had
that.
to do with security,
hypothetically, you probably couldn't have done that before 2023.
but it had to do with security, though, right? I mean, we certainly see it as a security issue.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely why it was added. I don't think that you're the only ones who hypothetically may have met about it before. Before 2023. This is also a new one. The public body or the governing body can meet in executive session to consider the safety of the governing body members, which is going to be staff and volunteers, as well as the public body's facilities and meeting spaces.
That's a new one.
Now, this is important. It's very specific that it has to be about the governing body's staff and volunteers and the public body's facilities and meeting spaces. Once you start talking about the public walking across the sidewalk or the building that is next door and is only 3
Right.
feet away and could catch fire, once you start talking about those pieces, that has to happen in an open session. But when you're just talking about the governing body's people and the public body's buildings and structures, you can meet in executive session to talk about.
So I'll give you the scenario that I'm thinking about, and that is we're getting ready to do some major renovations here.
Mhm.
Physical security is going to be a big topic. And I would then look at that as under public bodies, facilities and meeting spaces.
Yep.
Okay,
That makes sense to me.
okay. That would be something we probably would want to have conversations about. So
Now, when let's see here, where are we at? There's. Make sure I give you all the information about that. Yeah, so once it again, it just has to be about those things. Once you get off of your property, that has to happen in open public. But yeah, those are the permissions that you have. Again, there are some less frequent ones, and those are included on the resource we're going to give you. We're just not going to go over them today. I do want just to reiterate and actually just hit on all of the ways that media can be removed from executive session per public meetings law. So there are 4 reasons for it.
Before you go there, back to the safety thing. If, just hypothetically, if we were worried, and we're not, but we were worried about safety of the commissioners. And we were thinking about hiring, I don't know, bodyguards or something, okay? Can we make the decision to do that in executive session, or do we have to come out in public session to say we're gonna do this thing to protect the facilities of the people?
So you still have to come out. No final decisions can be made
Okay.
in executive session. Now, media, there are 4 reasons per public meetings law why media can be removed from your executive session. We've talked about 2 of them. So the first one is when you're meeting with your labor negotiator, you could ask the media to leave. The second is going to be if you're discussing the expulsion of any elementary or secondary school student. Third is students' confidential records. If you're going over them, media can be asked to leave. And the last one is if the media is party to or connected to a news organization that's party to litigation that you're discussing, then the media can be asked to leave during that as well. per public meetings law, these are the reasons you can ask media to leave. This is what the resource looks like. Again, it's really handy one. If it's something that you need to be able to reference, absolutely use it. We're gonna be sending it to you in your email. Okay, so now we're gonna get into two scenarios where you're in executive session and something goes awry, and what you're expected to do per the law as a governing body member. The first one is, what do you do if the session goes off topic? So you're in executive session, everything's been noticed, fine. You're in here, everything's been great to this point. And then all of a sudden, you realize, man, we're talking about something we did not cite. Okay, so the first thing that the public meetings law wants you to do as a governing body member is state your objection to the discussion. So, hey, everyone, we're talking about this item, but we really shouldn't be because we didn't cite it. We need to probably get back on track. If your group gets back on track at that point, great. That's all you got to do, right? It's the purpose is we realize like it's pretty easy to get off topic really fast. So get everyone back on topic, keep going, you're great. Let's say though, everyone's like, no, we're gonna talk about this. I used to try and give reasons why they wouldn't listen to you, but that'll get me in trouble, so I'm not listening to any of those. They don't listen to you. They decide we're still gonna talk about this and we don't care what you think. At that point, you kind of have one thing that you're expected to do as from the public meetings law perspective. And that is that you announce on the record that you're going to leave the session, and then you actually leave the session. If you stay in the session, you are making yourself a part of a conversation that is a violation of public meetings law. Now, this can feel counter to what you feel like you should do, because you're a group that works together on these things. And I don't want my people to make this mistake. I want to try and help get us back to where we need to go. But if a complaint comes out and goes to our commission, you got to remember that you're all going to be held responsible individually. So what you do as an individual matters. So in this case, if they all continue to have that conversation and you announce for the record that you're going to leave and you leave, when it comes to our commission, they can see this person tried to do what we asked by stopping it, and then they couldn't get it to stop, so they left and were not a part of that conversation. The results of your case are probably going to be different than everyone else who stayed and took part in that conversation. So that's why this piece is in there. The other one that we see that comes up a lot is when you're in executive session and you realize you have a conflict that you didn't announce. And this happens a lot, happens to our commission sometimes too. Sometimes you just don't know, like you see a last name written, but it doesn't look the way that it sounds when you say it, you know. That would happen to me all the time. I'm terrible at that. But for whatever reason, you're now here, you have this item coming up, and you realize, oh man, I've got a conflict. So what are you supposed to do? Because now this is technically an ethics law violation. It's not a privilege use or a public meetings law. Conflict of interest is. So we're not going to talk about that because that's a whole hour-long training on what that means. But with conflicts of interest, you're expected to announce them publicly and before any action is taken. And so if you're already in executive session, you can't make it publicly now because you have closed off the public from this part of the meeting. So what the public meetings law expects you to do is one of two things. Well, the first thing before the one of two things is stop the meeting and let everyone know I have a conflict of interest. And then at that point, you can either leave the room before any discussion happens on that topic. When that topic's over, someone can come get you, you can come back for the rest of them, that's fine. You're just leaving for the one that you have the conflict over. Or if possible, the governing body can table that agenda item for a future meeting where you can then announce your conflict properly. Now, there are two different kinds of conflicts of interest. One of them allows you to be a part of the discussion still. And so that's why you lose that opportunity if you don't make the announcement, because it doesn't matter what type of conflict it is. If you didn't announce it before you went into executive session, these are your only two options. If you did announce it and it's a potential conflict of interest, you still get to talk about it in executive session, so you kind of lose out on that opportunity. If you don't announce it beforehand. And that's why that piece is in there. Now you had asked about coming out of
Right.
into public session and back into executive session. I won't say that you can't do that. The problem is, how do you assure that the public got to be there during that announcement?
Okay,
And that is the tricky part
Okay.
when it comes to that.
there's the solution, so that's fine.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, and so this is the easier or the safer way to handle that situation. All right, any questions on executive session? All right, now we got a poll. Yeah. Okay. So this is that written notice that you've got to give to an individual who is going to have a performance review or anything like that. What are the rules around that written notice? Pick all that apply. So set 24 hours in advance, identify a public body, gives them the option to have the attorney present, tells them the reason for convening an executive session, provides how to request open session, identifies the date, time, location of the meeting, and it's sent by official mail. What are the things that have to happen with that notice?
You get to pick multiple choices.
Multiple ones, yep. I'll even give a little extra time at the end to give a bunch of punch them all in. Yeah, mine's here. I keep hearing mine, so I've been worried everyone's like, come on. All right, let's see, we got, hey, you know what? The two that aren't in play, you don't have to let them wait for their attorney, again, unless they've got some kind of a contract or agreement that allows that. But per public means like you don't have to let them wait for their attorney, and you don't have to send it by official mail, so. For the most part, we did awesome. All right, now we're gonna talk about the grievance and complaint process. The grievance process is new as of 2023, and it encompasses all of public meetings law. One thing I sometimes like to bring up, which is funny to me, when we first got jurisdiction over public meetings law, we got jurisdiction to take grievances and to take complaints, but they forgot to give us jurisdiction to train anyone on it. And so we had to get a special approval to do that. That was fun. But this has been around since 2023. We can now, this process exists, and this is what it looks like. So the first thing that's different is if an individual wants to make a complaint, they think there's been an alleged violation, they must file a grievance with the public body first before they can file a complaint with us at OGEC. And that's the public body. And the reason for that is the public body is way more accessible than the governing body. And so what that means is that there are new requirements for the public body. So what those requirements are is that the public body, they must post on their website, they must designate an individual who receives the grievances. So they need to have that person's name, they need to have their email, and they need to have the hours with which they will receive an in-person grievance. The reason why they need to have the hours they will receive in-person grievance is because we realize if you don't put that on there, then when this person is at the grocery store at 7 p.m., people are going to try and hand them a grievance. And we don't want that to happen. So make sure that, because they have to be allowed to turn them in person, make sure that that's also on there as well. If you don't have that person designated, until they're designated, the chair of the governing body or the chief administrative officer of the public body are the people who would be receiving those until that person is designated. If you don't have a website, then you need to provide the notice of that individual the same way you would public meetings. The public body is required to accept grievances that are filed in person, first-class mail, email, or other ways that they deem appropriate. And those grievances are written grievances. So now we're going to look at the process. So we've got a person who feels there's been a violation. What do they need to do? Well, first they must file with the public body, right? That grievance to the public body. It needs to be a written grievance, and they must file it within 30 days of the alleged violation. Has to come in within 30 days. These are calendar days, not business days. Then they must give the public body 21 calendar days to respond in writing to them. They have to do this. This is what the grievance process is. Now, on the other side of things, the public body side, they receive the grievance, they have 21 days to respond to that individual in written form. They must, in their written response, acknowledge the receipt of the grievance. And they must send OGEC a copy of the written grievance and the response. The reason why they need to do that, I will explain in a couple slides. But that is an important piece, and you can send it to this. It's pdgr@ogec.oregon.gov. If you forget that email, because there's a million emails, you can always find it on our website. If you also forget the process, you can call us and we'll help you through the process. We know it's a new one, so we're more than happy to do that. As far as how you respond to their grievance, there's a few ways you can respond. You can deny the facts and deny the violation. In that situation, you're going to tell them, what you stated in the grievance, that is not what happened. Here's what happened. You're going to give the public body's version of it, and then you're going to explain why that's not a violation of public meetings law. If you admit the facts and deny the violation, you're going to admit what you stated is exactly what happened, but that's not a violation of public meetings law, and here's why. Explain that to them as well. Now, if you admit both, you're going to say, yes, that is what happened. Yes, that is a violation of public meetings law. And then you're going to explain to them how the steps that will be taken to cure that violation. So that could look like maybe we're going to rescind the vote and we're going to have another re-vote on it at the next meeting, right? Or you're going to, maybe you're going to hold another meeting in 45 days and you're going to say in that meeting, we didn't have a violation. We're not going to rescind the vote because of these good reasons. But here's the steps we're going to take in our process to make sure we don't violate again, right? Those are some options you have to try and cure that violation. The important thing to know is that regardless of how you respond to them, if they go through the process, they then can file a complaint with OGEC. And so you need to know what our process looks like when it comes to complaints. So with this new grievance process, in order to file a complaint with OGEC, they must have provided the public body 21 days to respond in writing to their grievance. They also must provide a copy of their grievance, and they must provide a copy of the response that they got from the public body, or affirm they didn't get one. If they don't do all three of these things, their complaint is automatically withdrawn. And that's why it's important for the public body to send us a copy of the grievance, because if they say, well, I didn't get one, and we have a copy of what they received, that's a problem for them, right? They must do all of these things. Now, when it comes to complaints, let's say they did everything right, and now the complaint comes to us. The first thing you should know is that we only take signed complaints. They cannot make a complaint anonymously. We just had someone, I think, try to make a complaint with a whole bunch of fake information. And that doesn't count either. You can't do that. They've got to be attached to their complaint, right? When a complaint comes in, it goes into what's called preliminary review. That's where an investigator looks to make sure there's enough information to warrant even an investigation. But ultimately, our commission is the one who gets to decide whether it goes to investigation or whether or not a violation has occurred and what the sanction is going to be. Throughout the entire process, that investigator is going to be with you, keeping you knowing what's going on. And when it comes to us for public meetings law, a case is going to be opened in preliminary review on every single governing body member. They will be consolidated for the investigative purposes, unless a governing body member doesn't want that to happen. But you will, again, your case will be an individual case. You're not all at the same time happening. Now, when you do go to preliminary review and investigation before the commission, you will be allowed to represent yourself in those situations. You'll be allowed to make comments to our commission and talk about what happened and be a part of that. You're not excluded from that process. And again, because it's individual, we go back to stepping out if that conversation goes awry, right? Like if you did what your part was supposed to be, your sanction could look different, or your case could look different than the other people that you are members of that governing body with. So that's why it's important to follow these individually. Now, I'm not going to take questions right off the bat. I do want to get to the end since we're coming up on time. We will we'll skip these. The public body has 21 days, needs to send a copy to OGEC. When it comes to sanctions, the maximum sanction that you could receive from OGEC is $1,000 in civil penalties. Now, our commission is very committed to education. A majority of what has gone out and what will go out are letters of education. The point of our commission isn't to be punitive. It's not to try and, we're not hiding in the ducks during your meetings, seeing what's going on. We really understand that it's a sacrifice to serve on these commissions and these committees. And so we want to make sure things are happening the way they're supposed to. But often what comes with that is a letter of education, or maybe requiring some extra training. And so that's the majority of what goes out, but you can receive that maximum penalty given the situation. So it's important that you know that. One thing that's separate from OGEC completely, but is important for you to know, is that being a member of a governing body, any individual who is affected by the decision of a governing body, they can file a suit in circuit court towards that governing body. Now that has to happen within 60 days of the alleged violation. And a circuit court, they can actually reverse or change a decision made by a governing body. OGEC can't, we don't even try, but this can happen in a circuit court. And if the circuit court determines that there was a disregard for the law or any kind of willful misconduct, they can award the plaintiff the attorney fees, and then the individual governing body members could be liable to their public body or governing body to cover those charges. And so that's just information you need to know exists. It's not a part of OGEC at all. But before we get to any of those things, if you ever have a question, we want to bring you back to reaching out to us for advice. Get that safe harbor protection, get the people who are going to be committed to trying to get you an answer for your situation. We want to help you. We want to be viewed as a resource. That's what I have to say about that. I'm going to hit these last two spots really fast, and then I will stick around afterwards to answer any questions because I just want to honor the time we're at time. But for the training requirement, the law requires that any governing body member who serves a public body that has a fiscal expenditure of $1 million or more, or expenditure of $1 million or more in a fiscal year, they must take this training once within their term. If they serve on multiple bodies, one training can suffice for multiple terms that they're currently in, but it's the current term that they're in. And so that is the requirement. Again, we encourage everybody to take it because even if you're not required, you're still going to have to follow public meetings law. So you should still know this. But that is what the requirement is. The nice thing for all of you to know is that if you are required to get it, you got it. We're at the end of the training. You're going to get credit for this. We talked about a ton of stuff. We do have these last two. Hopefully, you know that you've got a lot of resources, and we're going to send you copies of all of these in the email that's going to come to you afterwards. We also hope that you feel more confident at the end of this training. I do want to point out that the first email you're going to receive from us is going to have those resources. It's also going to have a survey for feedback. This is a new training for us. We've only been doing it for a few months. If you're willing to give us feedback, it really helps us know if this training is working, if we need to focus on the places. It really helps us make this a good resource for all of you. So please, if you're willing to do that, please fill that out. The second email that you get is going to come from this email. We know that if you have a government email, they don't always like PDFs, and that's how it's going to come to you. So it could go to your junk or your spam folder. So if you don't get your certificate by the end of next week, please contact us and we can make sure you get the certificate showing that you accomplished this training, that you did what you were supposed to. But outside of that, that's the end of this training. I know you guys are in a public meeting, so whatever you got to do for that, I'm willing to stick around after that to answer any questions.
Okay.
Wait, if we're gonna ask you questions about how we act, doesn't it have to be part of the public meeting? That's a serious question.
Serious question. It does not.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we can adjourn the meeting. 3:33. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Helpful.
Good job.
Thank you.
And thank you for putting up with the two of us who didn't follow the rules.
Oh, it's totally fine. Yeah, if you could please.